Like, even just like in that little second, like little snapshot of you guys, I'm instantly like, oh, lay worker, like 20s and 30s communities. I really want to hear more about what you do. And I know that there's so many great stories in this room and that you're all so involved and so busy. But I think that the challenge that comes with that, with all the stuff that we're all involved in, all the amazing things we want to see and do, is it can be really hard to actually find time and space and moments to be still. So why don't you just, right now, where you are, just really quickly, just pause for a minute, shut your eyes, and just try and be totally still. Still in your mind, still in your heart. Okay, you can open your eyes again. It's quite weird, isn't it, when someone's like, okay, be still. I don't know about you, but when someone does that with me, I'm always like, oh. And I kind of like try and find that weird space in my mind in between, like, you know, when you stop and you're instantly like going through your to-do list, or you're just like zoning out and sort of falling asleep. Like, what's that in between sort of like holy stillness? I think that stillness can be a real challenge. I personally find it really difficult. I find that if ever there's a moment where I'm not supposed to be doing something, I'll just so quickly look at my phone, or I'll do something to engage myself. I don't often be still. And yet there's this verse in the Bible that says, be still and know that I am God. In other words, there is something about our human condition and the divine majesty that means that to truly know, like to experience and understand God, we actually have to get this thing. We actually have to learn what it means to be still. And as all of your leaders here and pioneering all these incredible things and starting revivals on your campus and running amazing student outreaches and discipling a generation and all the other amazing things that you're all doing, I'm kind of willing to bet that you're all pretty busy. That as you're looking ahead to this new year, your diary is probably already getting almost unmanageably full. And your mental to-do list is kind of racking up, particularly when you come to this and you get all new ideas of more things you can be doing. Life as a disciple of Jesus and as a Christian leader it's full, it's all-consuming. It's an adventure, and I wouldn't swap it for the world. But in the busyness of it all, it can sometimes be really easy to miss the be still and know that I'm God part, can't it? And yet, how can we do this job of a disciple? Which is, how can we show the world what God is like if we don't stop and be still and know him? It's that kind of beautiful, counterintuitive, upside-down logic of the kingdom. Jesus kind of looks at the campus that you're working in. So he looks at Durham, he looks at Manchester, he looks at all the situations that we're about to go back to, with all of the potential and the amazing student programs we've got planned for the year ahead. And he says, that's great, love your ideas for freshers, love what we're going to do. Now let's get to work, be still. We're like, that seems totally counterintuitive. We're not going to get anything done that way. I think it's a little bit like with fishing. Now I have to confess, I literally know nothing about fishing. I've never done it in my life. But I work with Roger Ellis, you know, the guy who was talking yesterday, you know, those pictures of fish. And believe me, that is nothing. I have seen so many pictures of fish in my days working with Roger. So I know a little bit from him. But I was out for a run the other day along the river that runs behind our house. And I was running past this dad and his little boy. And the dad was obviously teaching this little boy how to fish. And the little boy was like shaking the rod everywhere, and he was like splashing his feet in the river, and he was just, basically what he was doing was he was expelling, like he was trying to expel all of his physical energy in order to get the fish, right? So it kind of makes sense, like I've got to like do something. He's like shaking the rod and kicking his feet around, and the dad is like desperately trying to get him to just hold still for a moment. Because here's the thing, if he wants to catch a fish, the little boy actually needs to learn to be still. And with all that wriggling and splashing and moving, he's just going to scare the fish away. In order to get somewhere, he needs to stop moving. It feels like the productive thing. It feels like the sensible thing, movement, going, impetus, expanding our energy. But it's actually splashing and moving And Jesus' beautiful counterintuitive logic is this: you need to learn to practice stillness if you're going to change the world. And I'd love to say that that story ended with me kind of like coming back from my run and running past, and the little boy is like just like perfectly content in his dad's arms, catching the 10th fish of their back, and he was actually like head to toe in mud. The rod was like all tangled up on the floor, and the boy was like howling because he somehow got a bug in his eye. And so I'd love it to be a bit more poetic, but at the same time, I kind of think that often in my life, it's a little bit more like the second one, right? Like I just get so busy, and I get so busy that I end up just getting a bit tangled and a bit muddy. Stillness is so challenging, yet I really believe that if we're going to see revival and transformation on our campuses, we need to learn to unlock its power in our lives. So over the course of this conference, we've been thinking about the different spheres of influence in student societies, in student life, And I love that Fusion as a movement really recognised the significance and importance of that sphere of alone time as being a place to influence and transform your city. A guy called Archbishop William Temple once said, "Your religion is what you do with your solitude." It's like pretty challenging, isn't it? In our world of sort of Twitter updates and Netflix, your religion is what you do with your solitude, with your alone time. What do you do in those quiet moments in the day, in between things? Where does your mind wander to? What do you fill your mind with? Or when you start the day or finish the day, in those moments of stillness, is it kind of your first activity to pick up your phone from your bedside table? Is that the last thing you do at night, is to set it down? What do you do with your solitude, with your stillness? I was really challenged this summer by a preacher who said that his life dramatically changed when he made this decision to intentionally give God his nights. So he just made it his decision that the last thing every night would be he would just pause, just direct his mind to heaven, his mind to God, and give his night to God. So even in his dreams, he was directed towards heaven. Your religion is what you do with your solitude. What about those first moments when we wake ourselves up with our Twitter updates? What would it look like to really give God your mornings? To give God those first few minutes in your day, to be still and know that he is God. See, the thing is that for our campuses to change, and for our students to grow in knowledge and love of God, for our city to be different because we're there, we need to get radically aligned with the heart of God for our city. We need to get his perspective. We need to be filled with his spirit. So we need to be people who give our solitude to Jesus, people who prioritize stillness, and people of prayer. We need to have what my friend Pete Portal calls a daily Pentecost. So like, even if you just have 5 minutes in the shower, don't leave your house without that time when you intentionally direct your mind towards God and ask to be filled with his spirit again. Because yesterday's encounter, no matter how incredible it was, yesterday's encounter actually doesn't sustain us for today. It was never meant to. And without those times of stillness, we just become like that little boy. We get a bit frantic, we get a bit splashy, and we miss out on all the potential that is around us. But with those times of stillness, suddenly our perspectives change, don't they? Suddenly we begin to tap into the wisdom of heaven for our situations, and that's what actually will set us apart in this world. It's what will set our students apart. Our students are out there, leading student societies, leading in the uni football team or the debate club or wherever it is. They will actually be different to everyone else on the field if they learn to tap into the wisdom of heaven, right? It'll change the way in which they interact in all of the spheres that they live and work in. Their leadership is going to look different because they've learned from the greatest leader ever. Their leadership should be better than anyone else around them. A.W. Tozer said, "The world is perishing for lack of the knowledge of God, and the church is famishing for want of his presence." And so we need to be leaders who are like carrying that presence to our hungry campus and raising up students who point the way to the presence of God. And this is his advice to us. This is Jesus' advice to us. Could someone read for me from the Bible? Does anyone have a Bible or a Bible on your phone that could read for me from Matthew chapter 6? Is someone up for getting that for me? Matthew chapter 6, and we're going to read verses 5 to 8.
And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street, on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them. Your Father knows what you need before you ask him.
Brilliant, thank you. Don't you just love how totally straightforward Jesus is sometimes? We try and overcomplicate it, but he literally just says, go into your room and shut the door. Go into that place that is secret, that no one can see you. The Greek word that is used here for room is like inner room or storeroom. So this would be a room like in the centre of the house that was used to store food in, so it had no windows for temperature control. And Jesus says, go in there, shut the door and seek God. Go into your pantry, go into your cupboard and shut the door. You know, of all of the areas of Christian ministry, this is maybe our most secret. The inner room of prayer, where there are no windows and nobody sees and nobody hears except God. That is such a special, sacred place between you and heaven that nobody else knows about. And you know, I think that the amount of time that we spend in the secret place, it's not so much a test of our faith or our orthodoxy. You know, it's not a question of am I going to get in heaven or not as to how much I do this. And it's not about a sort of a duty or a debt that you owe to God, because it's not like he's owed something. It's us that get something from prayer, right? I think it's not a test of our faith. It's more of a test of our friendship. Do you want to be a friend of God? Do you want to know him? Do you want to give over your alone time in order to know him better? We know that God's presence is all around us, don't we? He says, I'm always with you. He's always here. C.S. Lewis calls it his incognito presence, which I really like. It sounds like something from James Bond or something cool like that. But his incognito presence, he's always here. But there is something of the presence of God that he actually reserves for that secret place of prayer, that inner room of prayer that we actually can't find anywhere else. He sort of reserves something of himself for those people who will separate themselves to look for him. Go into your room and shut the door. Separate yourself. Go to that place that holds no distractions in order to meet with me. Have any of you ever had that experience of maybe walking into your prayer room or sitting down to pray and you get this sense of he's here waiting for me? Have you ever had that? And it's like that weird thing of I know you've been with me all day long, you've been here, you've been ahead of me, you've been behind me, and yet somehow you're here waiting for me. It's like there's something of him that is reserved for those who will seek it out, for those who will get into the inner room in order to meet with him, to be with him. There's this really rare, endangered bat, and it's called the Seychelles sheath-tailed bat. Try saying that after a couple of glasses of wine. The Seychelles sheath-tailed bat. And basically, this bat, it's found in the Seychelles, which is a tiny string of islands in the Indian Ocean. And one of the tiny islands along that row of tiny islands is called Silhouette Island. And Silhouette Island is home to the only colony of these sheath-tailed Seychelles bats in the whole world. That's the only place that they can be found. So if you're sort of a bat enthusiast, which I'm sure most of us in this room are, if you're a bat enthusiast and you just are so passionate about bats and so you really want to lay eyes on this Seychelles sheath-tailed bat, you could fly to the coolest, most exotic places on the planet. You could go to all the places where bats hang out, at the caves and wherever bats hang out, I don't know. You could fly all over the world, look at all these different places. You could get access to universities where you could read loads about these bats. You could sort of fly to America and go to a special bat convention where they're talking about these bats. But if you want to see it with your own eyes, there's only one way to do that. You have to get yourself to Silhouette Island in the Seychelles. And we can know absolutely everything that there is to know about prayer. We can literally write the book on what prayer in Greek and Hebrew really means. We can be theologians about prayer. We can know everything that there is to know about it and about the presence of God, about God himself. But there is such a distinct difference between knowledge about God and experience of the presence of God. We need to be the people who go to Silhouette Island. Don't settle for coming to the bat convention, as it were. We need to get ourselves to the place where we know we will see it with our own eyes. Whatever the cost, we've got to get ourselves into that inner room. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to just survive on stories of what it's like there. I don't want to survive on stories even of what it was like when I went there 3 years ago and I had the best experience of seeing the bat. I want to survive on that. I want to hunger and thirst for it, that I will get myself there at all costs. Prioritizing stillness, separating ourselves to the inner room of prayer, allows us to go beyond the kind of presence of God that surrounds us and enter into that manifest presence of God. There's something of himself and his voice that we will actually miss if we don't get ourselves there. Do you know that epic story in 2 Kings about Elijah and hearing the voice of God? And you remember he goes up the mountain and God kind of puts him on the edge of this mountain and then blasts him with fire. But God's not in the fire, and he blasts him with an earthquake and God's not in the earthquake, and he blasts him with a hurricane. It's a big day for Elijah. Blasts him with a hurricane, but God's not in that. And then in the silence, after all of that chaos, can you imagine standing through all of those things? After all of that chaos, the dust kind of settles. The earth sort of comes back into alignment. Everything falls quiet. And there comes this gentle whisper. Because here's the thing about a whisper. You have to actually be really close to hear it. And so there's something about the nature of God, which is that he wants us to be really close. Do you see what I'm saying? He doesn't want to have to yell at us. He doesn't want to have to stop traffic in order to get our attention, although sometimes he does do that. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. Sometimes he does, but actually he whispers because he wants us to be close. He wants us to be still and to prioritize him. It's about being a friend of God. Do you want to be his friend? And then when we find him in there, when we really experience his presence, we grow in faith. And what that means is the way that we trust him really changes. Do you guys know that that trust exercise where somebody has to stand here and then someone stands behind and then you fall, which I'm not going to make you do, don't worry. I hate that game. There's just something in me that I can't handle that game. But my husband, for some reason, has decided that trust is an important element in a marriage. And so he often wants to play this game. And so he'll do it all affectionately, and he'll stand beside me and sort of dip me over. And that's fine. That's all fine because I can kind of see him. But then the other day he comes in and he's standing behind me. And he's like, "Oh, go fall, I'll catch you." And I just I can't do it. And I think there's something about if he's here and I can see his face. I know he's paying attention. He's not sort of checking the Manchester United scores on his phone or doing something else. That I can see his face. I know that he's paying attention. And when I see his face, the way that I trust him really changes, right? And I think the same thing happens when we go into this inner room and we seek his face. The way that we trust him when we go out into the world, it really changes. Because the thing is about ministry, the thing is about being a disciple, to be honest, being a follower of Jesus, is that it's flipping risky. I don't know if you've ever noticed that in the Gospels, but these disciples, they do not get themselves in for an easy ride. And neither do any one of us that says yes to Christ. Every day is filled with opportunities to step out in faith. What Miriam was talking about last night, those little nudges, those little moments of I've got to put myself out there and get really uncomfortable. Life as a disciple is so full of these moments. And he's constantly calling us to risk. But when we've gone into the inner room, when we've sought the secret place of his face, the way we trust him really changes. We know that we can step out. We get this increase of faith. So when those moments come, we know what to do. Faith decisions get easier. Confusions get clearer. I wonder what risks God might be calling each of you to this term. As you look ahead to this academic year, what risks might he be calling you to step into? Geographical risks, financial risks, difficult decisions. Our discipleship journey is so full of these things. But when we see his face, the way we trust him changes. In this secret place of prayer, in this inner room, this is also the place that we get really prepared and honed and shaped for our calling. So, David in the Old Testament, he gets called to a castle, but he was actually prepared in a field. And he was separated, he was by himself with the Lord. It was there that God honed him and fine-tuned his perspective, taught him how to pray, taught him how to lead, taught him how to fight, taught him how to trust God. His calling is to a castle, but he gets prepared in this kind of field. He gets anointed in the field. And this is so important for you guys as you're raising up a generation of students into their calling, because say Anna is discipling someone who is called to be a worship leader. That person is not going to get prepared and shaped and honed for their calling whilst on a stage. They might not even get honed and shaped for their calling with an instrument in their hand. They're going to get prepared for their calling in this secret place, the place of prayer. And so in that inner room, in that pantry, they get shaped and honed and called so that then one day they can actually be on a stage, because God has already done that inner secret work in them. There's that beautiful verse in Isaiah 49 where it says, he hides you in the palm of his hand until you come out a sharpened arrow. I think this time for students, it's such a time of hiddenness in so many ways. It's such a time when God is hiding them in the palm of his hands and can be sharpening them and preparing them for the calling that is ahead of them. This generation of students that you're all discipling and raising up is going to be prepared and propelled into their destinies in the secret place of prayer. We need to make sure that they are prioritizing stillness. In the inner room of prayer, they're also going to remember and discover their identity, who they really are in Christ. He's just so all about that. Jesus is so all about your students discovering and stepping into their fulfillment as sons and daughters, which is why when he teaches us to pray, the first two words are our Father. Before you say anything else, you have to remember who you are, right? I'm a son, I'm a daughter. And that comes to define everything about that moment in prayer. We get shaped into our identity in there. And this was Jesus' own pattern, wasn't it? He taught us to pray exactly how he prayed. He sought out the secret place. He didn't have a pantry himself. So he'd climb a mountain, he'd go into a garden, he'd get away, he'd prioritize stillness. You kind of think, if Jesus needed to prioritize these moments, how much more do we? These moments of stillness. So when we prioritize and revolutionize our alone time, we nourish our souls as we move from knowledge about God to experience of him. The way we trust him changes because we see his face and realign our perspective with his. We get prepared for our calling in there, and we really refresh our identity as sons and daughters. And so how do we actually do this? It's a good question. How do we actually raise up a generation who want to prioritize stillness? I'd love to know what you guys think on this, because that is the question, isn't it? I recently heard an expression which I love, which someone was talking about setting up an ambush for God. And I think sometimes the problem that we have with stillness is that we can hear this language of being still. Or like in Psalm 37, it says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him." We hear this thing of like stillness and waiting, and it can feel like quite a passive thing. Like just being in a waiting room, sitting and waiting. But when you actually look at the language and the context of this, what it's actually talking about is actually much more the language of like setting up an ambush. It's kind of a hunting metaphor. It's like setting a trap for God, for his presence. And so what it's saying is like strategically set yourself in the place where you know he frequents so that you're ready when he begins to speak. And the best thing, of course, about setting up an ambush for God is that he wants to be found by us. How many of you know that when dads play hide and seek, they don't play hide and seek to hide. They play hide and seek to be found. And so when God's like, come and find me, he's like that dad, you know, with like his whole leg sticking out from the sofa. He's not hiding to hide. He's hiding to be found by us. So the Bible says, be still and wait patiently. And that waiting is not like a passive kind of, I'm just waiting around. It's like if you've ever seen an animal that's like hunting its prey, like you watch a lion crouched and ready, like they're waiting patiently, but it's that patience that says, I will not move from this place until exactly the right moment when my prey comes. It's that setting up an ambush and strategically setting ourselves in the place where we know God frequents. I will seek the inner room of prayer. That's waiting patiently on God. That's the kind of Jacob wrestling with God moment. And so we get strategic. We get into the place where we know he frequents, which he says is the inner room of prayer. We give him our alone time. We actively pursue that. I love this quote that says, self-control is not saying no to so many things. It's saying yes to one thing so much that all these others lose their voice, which I really like. And it's that the presence of God is our one thing. And I want us to say yes to that so much that actually that temptation to just zone out on my phone or on Netflix begins to lose its voice because I find my one thing that I'm going to say yes to. So how do we help our students to really radicalize and revolutionize their alone time? I think, honestly, so much of it is actually leading by example, isn't it? Like each one of you guys, the way you spend your alone time, although it's secret, it will actually have an impact and an influence on them. We inspire them with our own kind of pursuit of the secret place. Have you heard of a leader in Northern Ireland called Alan Scott? Causeway Coast Vineyard, anyone heard of him? They've seen so many amazing things happen, and he was speaking on leadership recently, and he asked this question that like just has floored me ever since. And he said, what would it look like for God to replicate what's in your heart in the lives of all of the people that you're leading? So what would it look like if your prayer life was reproduced in the lives of all of your students? Which is like, I don't know about you, but to me that's really challenging, because actually that is what happens. The things that we are passionate about are the things that we're going to birth in our students, and so we lead them by example. I often think of Brennan Manning, who says that if we try and lead people into encounters that we've never had ourselves, we become, he describes it as being like cheap and unconvicted travel agents, handing out brochures to somewhere that we've never been. As Alan was saying, we got married there in December. And so one of the really fun parts of getting married is you plan a honeymoon. And we went to this travel agent, and we work in Christian ministry, so we're on like a budget. And so we go to this like slightly budget travel agents, and we're chatting to this one guy, and he's like, just like a real lad. Have you ever sat down opposite like just like a lad? And you're like, I'm planning my honeymoon, and he's like talking about like all the beers and the all-inclusive and all this. And so we were just a bit unconvinced by him. But he had actually been to this one place that we were thinking of going. And he was like quite a big sort of wheezy guy. And he was like, oh yeah, I took this girl I was dating to this island that we were wanting to go to. And he was like, it's all dead romantic. Like they put all these petals in the bed and like loads of flowers in the room. He was like, but the thing is, I'm like totally allergic, so I was just like snotting and sneezing all over her, and she dumped my ass. And so he described this, but the thing is, because he'd actually been there, he described it in such intimate detail that actually it made us want to not go there. And we did not go there on our honeymoon, because all we would have pictured was him just snotting and It's a horrifying description, but the point is that when we've actually been somewhere, when we've actually had these encounters, we can describe them in such a way that people will want to go there or not. But it's the presence of God, so they will. And so we lead by example, and we lead them to the secret place by our own experiences of what it's like there. Maybe we set up a 24/7 prayer room for them, or we set up nights of prayer. We set something going and say, come and join me. I'm going to do this. Come and join in with what we're doing. We inspire them with stories and teaching. Book someone from the 24/7 prayer team to come and talk to your students and just fill them with faith of what it can look like. Talk to Anna, who's done a prayer week, and all the amazing stories of what happens from that. Just inspire them, get them excited about prayer. And I often think it's like, if you're working with a group of students and you just feel like they don't have much appetite for this, like they don't really have a hunger for prayer or for Bible study or general kind of quiet times, it's that sort of thing of like, if you don't really know if you're hungry, but then someone's like baking a delicious pie in the kitchen next door, and you sort of begin to smell the aromas, it can kind of begin to like awaken that hunger in you until eventually you want to actually go into that other room and you want to kind of get there. And I think that for us as like student workers and as leaders in this context, we can kind of just get those aromas going. We can sort of like create this environment that actually awakens a hunger in other people because of our own hunger. Does that kind of make sense? And then I think just really practically, this may or may not be helpful, but I know that for some of the people that I've led, they just the thought of like sitting, say for 40 minutes alone with God is just like super intimidating, and they just want a really practical way in which to engage with him. I sometimes take them through this little kind of process. So if this is helpful, then take it and use it. If not, that's totally fine. It's just something that I use. So I say, take your 40 minutes, get into your inner room, get into that cupboard. It doesn't have to be literally a cupboard, though I sometimes do. Go into a cupboard. Go into that place where there's no distractions, where no one's going to come and bother you, no one's going to interrupt you, that secret place where you can just meet with God. Set aside your 40 minutes, and then I take them through 4 simple stages. So the first is Bible reading. The second is meditation, not like a sort of a hippie Eastern sort of meditation, which is trying to empty yourself. It's a meditation that's actually filling yourself. You see the difference? And then the fourth is contemplation. So the third, did I not say the third? Prayer. Oh, wow. 24/7 prayer. Third is prayer, sorry. Fourth is contemplation. So the first, Bible study. So they take their passage of however many verses. So maybe they're working through Bible reading notes, or you as a student group or working through a particular book. They take their passage, and then I have them read that passage 3 times. So often I read it out loud, like Miriam was saying about if you want to hear the voice of God, read the Bible out loud. There's just something really, really practical about that actually if you can just, and you're in the secret place, so you don't need to worry about people thinking that you're crazy, read the passage out loud. So they have them read it 3 times so that it really goes deep. And then I just get them to answer 3 questions just to prompt them to really wrestle with what they've read. So the first would be, what does this passage tell you about God? And they can begin to make notes or mental notes about what have I learned about God in that. The second question is, what does this passage tell you about yourself? And then the third thing that they do is they look for examples within that to follow, or commands to obey, or promises that they can claim. So 3 categories, and you'll almost always find an example to follow, a command to obey, or a promise to claim. So they go through those questions just to really engage and wrestle. And when they've done this process, often they've actually got so many revelations popping out at them. Like they're suddenly like, oh, I've never really noticed that how much Paul actually says here that I'm a child of God. Like, what does that really mean? And they get this like revelation, or maybe it's just like some old truths that they really need to be reminded of. And so then instead of kind of moving on from the reading of the passage straight away, which we often do, we kind of read it and then we move on, they actually stay in that place and they meditate on it, they focus on it. I think Bill Johnson has a great description of it, something like Christian meditation is a focused heart and a directed mind. Might be the other way around, but that makes sense, doesn't it? It's a directed mind. It's I'm focusing on God, when I'm directing my mind on this content. So they meditate, and meditation is kind of, it's not praying it and it's not studying it. It's more talking to yourself about God. So like self-communing. So if you, for example, like Psalm 103, David's like self-communing. He's talking to himself before God and just reminding himself of these truths. And so you meditate and really just chew over and really like run over these words in your mind. Sometimes if I'm doing this with a group, I give them like some boiled sweets and get them to like suck it. You know where you suck it and you get like all the different flavors out. So really they like ruminate on it and meditate on it. And then as they're meditating on it, ask them to think about this question, this really dangerous question. How would I be different if this truth was explosively alive in me, in my inner being? How would that change my day? Say it was this truth, I'm a child of God. How would that, if that was explosively alive in me, how would that change the decisions that I'm going to make today, the things that I'm facing? How does it change my day? And then they spend time in prayer, just talking to God about what's going on, chatting with him about their life, processing the world with him. And then that last stage of contemplation is thinking about, has God been speaking to me during this time? And of course he has, they've read the Bible. But what has God been saying? What's he been highlighting? Is he speaking prophetically into a situation that you're facing? Is he giving you a particular promise for a particular situation? What is he saying? And begin to ask yourself, why is God showing me this today? Right? What's going on in my life that actually this might be really important for me? And they take that with them. So that's just a really basic format of 40 minutes alone time with God that actually can just be quite helpful if they're feeling a bit overwhelmed by the thought of it. And as they grow more familiar with spiritual disciplines, they'll move on past needing a formula like that, but it can just be really helpful to sort of get out of the starting blocks. And I personally find that kind of thing really enriching because it just teaches you to go really deep. And then there's so many other creative ways to engage with God in prayer, and I'd love to like chat with you guys afterwards about different ways that we do this. One of my favourites at the moment is we do this thing sometimes with our students called marble memorization, just because it's alliteration, which we like. And so we give them a marble and get them to memorize a scripture, so like just one verse that they really want to like take into their hearts, into their minds, and they like hold their marble while they learn their verse, and then they just stick their marble in their back pocket, go out into their day, which means that every time they sit down, they get that slightly painful reminder of what the verse is, and then it's like this little reminder of like, what was that verse? And often you've forgotten it by the time you next sit down, so you get it out and you read it again, and you kind of go through your day, and actually you can really get a lot of scripture memorized, just doing like little tools like that. And so that's one of the like creative ways, but there's so many that you can do, and at 24/7 we're always kind of coming up with these and going all over the country telling people different ideas. So if you'd like any of those, then we'd be really happy to help. I've done so much talking at you, and so I want to just actually pause for a minute before we go, and I hope some of that has been helpful, and that some of that has been something that you can kind of take back with you. But I want to just pause and invite the Spirit of God to come and bring some revelation now in each of our hearts. So why don't you shut your eyes, and Holy Spirit, would you come? Would you begin to speak to us? And we thank you for your presence. We thank you for your word to us. We thank you for all that you have been doing and stirring in us throughout this conference. And I want to pray now, Holy Spirit, that you would begin to bring revelation to each one of our hearts about what it is that you have in store for us this year. And just in this place of quiet, I want you to just begin to talk to God about the year ahead. And Freshers Week is just around the corner, which hopefully doesn't bring up your mad to-do list instantly, but just begin to look ahead to this academic year and think, God, what dreams do you have this year for my students, for my city, for my church, for my campus? What are your big dreams? What are the things that actually I haven't even maybe thought of yet? Where does God want to just plant in you a little vision, a little idea? Maybe think through all the spheres of influence on campus. And in that space with God, just begin to expand the territory of possibilities in your mind. God always promises to actually do what we haven't asked or imagined. So let's ask and imagine something kind of wild. Ask him to expand the territory of possibilities. Ask him for those things that are really burning in your heart. Maybe it's a new initiative that you want to launch this year. Maybe you've got some wild idea from this conference or something that you want to start. Maybe you want to be like that guy who suddenly has 50 students on his hands who don't know Jesus yet. Maybe you want that to be your story this year. What's that big wild thing? What would that look like if that happened? Maybe it's actually a number that's come into your head of how many students you want to see saved this year. Begin to name those dreams, those big possibilities before God, and begin to ask him for them. Maybe you've got a vision of seeing Christian students in leadership in secular spheres in your societies. Maybe it's that. Whatever it is, begin to just picture those things before God and ask him for those dreams. And let him begin to speak to you about them. Jabez is this guy in the Old Testament, and all he does is pray this prayer: "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory." Where do you want God to expand and enlarge your territory this year? What is your Jabez prayer? What do you want to see him do in your campus? I'd love you now to just find somebody, find out what their big dream was and pray for it. If you'd rather actually just have a little introvert moment and pray by yourself, that's also totally fine. That's always what I want to do in these moments. But if you'd like to actually find out someone else's big dream, just take 2 minutes and go and pray for them. We're going to come back together in a minute. But just use this space to actually bless that thing. Find out what it was. You might actually be able to steal their big dream if it's a really good one, and then ask it for yourself as well. So why don't you just really quickly find someone you could bless and pray for. Do carry on those conversations if you want afterwards, and carry on praying for people and finding out their big dream, and hopefully you feel inspired by the faith and vision of the person next to you, or maybe you've got some great ideas that you can steal. I felt as I was praying for you guys there, just got a picture of a dam like filled with water, and just got this real sense of the amazing possibilities that are actually ahead of all of you and that are in store. And I think this thing of like praying and asking God to expand your territory, the thing with a dam is that it can only be as wide as it is deep, otherwise it crumbles structurally. And just this sense that actually God is going to expand each one of us, our territory, our influence, our impact on campus, but we can only go as wide as we go deep, or it's not going to work. And so this prioritizing of stillness is so crucial. I'd love to just pray for you, and then I think we need to head downstairs. But we'll be around, myself and Holly, who works at Trimson, we're around. If you've got any questions, if I've said anything dodgy that you'd like tell me off for, that's also fine. Or if you've got any questions at all or anything, then please do. I'd love to chat to any of you afterwards or pray with you. But Jesus, thank you for this time. Thank you for these incredible leaders and all of the city-changing dreams that you're birthing in each one of them. And Lord, I just thank you for the way in which each one of them is going to go out and have an extraordinary impact for your kingdom. And I just want to pray that you would give each one of us a deeper hunger for you and a deeper desire for your presence, that we might be people who prioritize stillness, who prioritize your presence. We love you, Jesus. Amen. Thank you guys so much for coming, and see you soon.